Good morning. Well, I've gotten a pretty good start on this 64 custom nightmare. Got the stupid cage off the back. Got that cheapo, not original garbage output transformer out. Got the standoff disconnected here. I'm not sure what order to do this in, but first of all the screws and washers holding all the various boards in place, every single one of them was loose. Big selling point for this amp is that it's all hand-wired, and people think that hand-wired is better than PCB. Each one of these boards is a PCB board, and there's nothing wrong with traces, but this is just, the deception of marketing that hand-wired is great, and PCBs are bad, so people buy this thing because they want hand-wired, and it's a PCB. It's a PCB with a layout that's vaguely reminiscent of a hand-wired Fender model. It's a terrible layout in comparison to what Leo actually sold in the 60s on the AB763s. So you have some of the advantages of PCB. In this case, you have none of the advantages hand wiring can offer, because hand wiring is so terrible in this thing with just spaghetti everywhere. But this is not the hand wired amp that you were thinking of. This is a sheep in wolf's clothing. All right, let's talk about some safety code things. So the power comes in on this AC cable, and the ground goes over here. I can't see where it was. It was here. And the hot and neutral both go to a power switch. Then the hot goes to the fuse. Now, that's illegal. Every device like this must be made such that it is independently fused, so that if you have a faulty switch, which happens all the time, you don't damage your house circuit. None of these devices are designed to rely on the circuit breaker or fuses in your home protecting you from fire. They're supposed to have their own fuse which protects you from fire, and if the fuse is behind the switch and the switch shorts, which happens, then you will either blow a circuit breaker or blow a fuse in your home panel, or you'll have a fire. If you have the fuse first, which is to code, then if you have a faulty switch, the fuse blows. Everything in the house is protected. So I don't know how Fender is able to sell this with a fuse after the switch. After the power switch and after the fuse holder, the black goes over to here, and it goes to the primary wire of the one of the primaries on the power transformer. The neutral, the white, comes over here, runs through this thermistor to the neutral primary, the other primary on the power transformer, and you've got this cap between the hot and neutral sides of the power transformer. Now, these caps fail. These thermistors fail. Do they do anything good for us? Not really. They're totally unnecessary. It's got a rectifier tube, so it already has slow inrush current. You don't need a thermistor. Filtering the incoming AC like this is really not that beneficial. You're not going to hear much of a difference with or without this cap. If you're going to have filtering, it's better to do it with very high voltage ceramics and, say, a power outlet strip. It could be just a power outlet strip on the floor. It could be a Furman, whatever. But I would want to see like a 1,000 volt AC rated ceramic cap, not one of these little films. So this is kind of useless. I'll probably retain the board just as a way to connect the neutral to the primary and the hot to the primary. But I'll probably modify it so that these cannot fail, because they're likely to, and they have no benefit. All right. The bias board is a pretty much straight copy of a Fender from the same years. Ignore the previous tech's badly tacked on radial here. Instead of 470 ohms, they have 22 ohms. Now, as far as the bias performance goes, you're not going to notice any difference. It's going to be a little bit cooler at one max setting of the pot. But that 22 ohms, look up Ohm's law. That's a really underrated wattage resistor for 22 ohms, where a 470 would normally be. So you can use a 1 watt or even a half watt 470 ohm there. I'd want that to be a 2 or 3 watt at 22 ohms. That's just a lot to dissipate. I'm going to change this out to the traditional 470. And what a crappily installed diode there. Let's see, other goodies. Grounds. So the AC ground was made here, and it was made well. But all the other grounds in the amp are made bizarrely. So here are the black wires from the cathodes of the 6v6s, and they go through these 1 ohm resistors, which are look like quarter watts, which is ridiculously under spec, to here, which is tied to here. So your ground for the output tube sockets is being made with a terminal strip, which was loose in the chassis. The screw was not tight, not very reliable hardware. And here we have the reservoir cap ground from the filtering caps, also going to that same eyelet. That would be fine if we had a better connection. I'm going to change this so that each output tube has its own ground lug held in place by the socket hardware. And I'm going to skip the bias measuring resistors because they're pointless. And I'm going to redo this ground to chassis with a dedicated ground lug, not a terminal. And the, let's see where the other one is. Oh yeah, the HT center tap ground was being made over here to another terminal, which was also loose. So I'm going to move these so that the reservoir cap ground and the HT negative center tap are, but I can't talk today. The HT center tap are both going to chassis there, pretty much where they were on an old Fender. And that'll be much more reliable ground joint without these silly terminals. Bonus stupid. This black wire here is going to the filter caps. This is the ground of all the preamp, screen, and phase inverter filter nodes in the amp, and it's being made to this input jack. Guess what's not tied on this amp? I'm going to reconnect the wire properly to this brass strip here, which is used almost for cosmetics in this amp, but is still capable of being a functional ground, so your entire amp's performance won't depend on a loose input jack. Duh. The lamp was completely loose, the pilot light holder, so that, a nice way to get a short. Crucially, let me get some of the spaghetti out of the way. This red wire here from the rectifier tube, that's your B plus to the first stage, it was going to the standby switch, and from the standby switch to over here, where it goes to the reservoir section. So they have standby before the reservoir. That's a big no-no. That's what Vox did in the AC30 Custom Classic, and that's why those rectifier tubes tend to die in that amp when you use standby. Because when you power the amp on in standby, and the rectifier tube is all hot, but there's no B plus stored in the filter caps, at the moment that you switch that on, for a few nanoseconds, maybe even up to a millisecond or two, that reservoir cap appears as a dead short. That's a big stressor for the rectifier tube. So if you do what intelligent people like Leo Fender spec'd out in this similar model, the model this is aping, you have the standby switch after the first reservoir cap stage. So as the rectifier tube begins to warm up and B plus DC voltage begins to trickle out of the rectifier, starts at 0 volts and goes to 10 volts. The moment that it sees that dead cap, it's got like a 1 volt. There's no big surge there. And by the time the rectifier tube is putting out the full, say, 440 volts, everything's fine. There's no surge, and that cap slowly fills up. That's what you want. Then you can put a standby after that first stage of filtering, which is what they do in the Super Reverb, the Deluxe Reverb, the Twin Reverb, etc. So the standby switch in this amp needs to be moved basically right before the choke. And fortunately, they have some badly implemented jumper wires here on the board, so that should be easy to change that out. But it's so important to have a standby in an amp like this after the first stage of filtering, not before. It's just crazy. Speaking of crazy, here's on this yellow wire, which is the 5 volt supply to the rectifier tube, they've got an inline fuse that's all heat shrinked away. So say you're on a gig and this fuse blows. Well, good luck changing that fuse without taking it to a tech. There are 3 ways to do this. You can either do it like this, which is the worst possible way for the owner because it makes it for an expensive repair, and it's difficult to do, and you cannot do it quickly. You could install a fuse holder into the chassis, say maybe one right here. And then you'd have a fuse, which the owner could change out on a gig. The third option is to say, hey, all those great Fenders from the 50s and 60s and 70s that everyone likes, they all seem to be working fine without a fuse on the rectifier. So let me just snip that off and bypass that. And that may be what we do. More information on that in just a minute. Similarly, there's an inline fuse here on the heaters. Now, I understand that to sell such products in Europe, each secondary off the power transformer must be fused to sell in Europe. And so this is the way to get around that. This is a paperwork fuse. This is a paperwork fuse. They're not really useful. They're not necessary. And if one goes out, and it's very common to have false fuse failures, that's hard to say, on heater supplies, then the amps toast until a tech can go in there and solder them in. So a better way to do it would have been to have maybe 2 fuse holders here in the chassis that the owner could access, change those out, or just to bypass them. I'll show you in just a minute another big part of the puzzle as far as whether to remove these fuses and whether it's a good thing. You know, this is not meant to be total gloom and doom, but these little switch condoms, they bother me. What is the point of those things? This switch, when it's installed in the amp, is at ground. The only way that you could get electrocuted by using one of these switches is if the entire chassis were live, you know, which is very unlikely given the fact that it has a grounded power cable. Of course, it'd be even less likely if they put the fuse before the switch. All right, I just used my calipers to measure the height of the power transformer of that 72 Deluxe Reverb. And the height of that 72 Deluxe Reverb is 2.8 inches, which is here. So a very small, physically small power transformer in this thing. So I'm worried that if I take out those fuses and a little bit of overage were to happen at some point in time, the stuff that happens with old amps from time to time, that the old transformers just shrug off, that this little piece of will die. So how much does Fender charge for these things with this tiny undersized bit of iron in it? And fuses that mean that if they go out, no gig for you? It's sad. Thanks for watching.